You described trauma as ubiquitous. And so I want to ask, is that too broad? And you're kind of not the, recently I've been hearing that sort of thing from more people. I think trauma used to be sort of a very circumspect event kind of thing. And now I've had guests that say, well, we're all traumatized, that life is traumatizing. So tell us, what sorts of trauma are we talking about here?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think this is a needle to thread. And I think we run into the danger here of, if we start saying that everything is traumatic, that we're watering down important science and research and folks that have done really grounded empirical research about what's happening when we have this cluster of symptoms. Now, I don't know what you think of the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. I know there's lots of controversy for some folks around it, but there is a lot of research going into these 4 particular symptom areas inside of the PTSD diagnosis. The definition of trauma that I'm using is any threatening, overwhelming experience that we can't integrate, that is too much for our nervous system, and it leaves us feeling helpless, frightened, overwhelmed, and profoundly unsafe. That's a definition I want to use. Now, we'll all have that to some degree, and research tells us, the study that I cite in there says, 90 to 92% of us internationally will be exposed to a traumatic event. But as you and your listeners will know, that doesn't mean that we'll necessarily have traumatic symptoms ongoing. And there's debate about this, about how many of us will develop post-traumatic stress. The numbers I use are between 15 and 18% will potentially develop post-traumatic stress. So I think it's a great and important question of, well, what are we saying when we mean trauma? And I want to, inside of this, so some of the examples could be a car accident, and experiencing interpersonal violence. I had the sudden loss of a child. Things that leave us, it's just deeply overwhelming for us. And at the same time, this is where I want to help broaden the conversation, and people have been doing research here, including with woman Monica Williams at the University of Connecticut, to say the everyday impacts of oppression for people who are targeted by systems of oppression actually over time can also lead to traumatic responses and actually be overwhelming. I'm really interested in that conversation.
Yeah.
What does overwhelm us? And David, I'll say is, at the end of the day, what's important is less, I think, the labels we put on it and the acknowledgement that some people's nervous systems become profoundly dysregulated. That's actually what we're working with, whether we call it trauma for insurance forms or not. That's a very important debate, and I'm most interested in when one becomes profoundly dysregulated, and how do we work with that effectively, especially inside of mindfulness.
Yeah. As I'm listening to you, I'm also kind of scanning my own experience, have I been traumatized, kind of wondering. And you mentioned automobile accidents, and I've been in a couple of automobile accidents as a younger person, and a motorcycle accident that would be pretty traumatic. I don't think they led to PTSD in my case. I also was with a friend once in a bar where a fight broke out, and this one guy just beat this other guy just mercilessly, went by pretty fast. And my friend that I was with, he wasn't nearly as aware of it as I was. It was no big deal to him. I felt pretty traumatized just being present in that situation. And it comes up, I remember it, like to talk about it now. So yeah, I think that was traumatic for me, even though I don't think it's not particularly led to PTSD, but it does tap into a fear about physical safety and violence and threat from the outside.